welcome back to another episode of the Dental Marketing Secrets Podcast, where we provide actionable tips and tricks that you can take and apply immediately to grow your practice, to serve more patients, and ultimately leave a greater impact. That is the name of the game, my friends. My name is Mark Thackeray. So excited to be here with you today. As always, it's a pleasure to share some of the things that we've seen have been working with our clients, and to share that with you, just in hopes that you can take that and grow your practice and get better results. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. It's a beautiful, beautiful sunny morning here just outside of Salt Lake City. It's such a nice time of year right now. It's just starting to warm up a little bit. We've had a massive winter this past season. Over typically, it's average. We average about 500 inches of snow through the course of the year. We've almost hit, and I think it's over 900 for this past season. So it's been a little bonkers, but it's nice to kind of feel the warmth, stretch out a little bit, and get outside. So nice time of year. But today I wanted to talk a little bit about Google Ads. I've been getting a lot of questions on this, so I thought this would be a good episode to focus on a little Q&A for Google Ads. I know a lot of practices out there want to be on Google and have maybe tried it in the past and with mixed results. And so we wanted to touch on a few questions that I get asked a lot when we're dealing with different practices. And we're going to kind of break those down and answer some of those questions today. So excited to get going with you on this first question, really. And if you haven't listened to I have some other episodes on Google Ads. Those are a good place to start if you're just kind of getting into Google Ads. Episode 66 is a good one. We talk about, just commonly asked questions. We talk about, how often should you change your budget? What does limited by budget mean? What should my cost per click be? Things like that. So that's a great episode, number 66, if you haven't listened to that one. But today we're going to hit on a few other questions. And to start, budget's always a good one. So let's start there because this comes up all the time. And I did talk about that in the other episode, but just in case you missed that, it's good to go over. Inevitably, you get people that are on both sides of the spectrum, right? They think, oh, I have to spend, $10,000 a month to get the results that I'm hoping for. Maybe you're cosmetic, whatever the case might be. Sometimes they have that perception, right? They come to me and say, oh, well, I know I need to be spending at least this much. Or they might come in the opposite and say, well, I don't want to spend more than a couple $100. I don't want to spend more than $500, something like that. And so you get the whole range. And what's cool about Google Ads is there's really you should have a threshold. Like, you should have a minimum. I typically say 500 you shouldn't probably go less than 500. You can make a small budget work. And I have clients that have done that and are still doing it because it works for them, but I think in today's day and age, to be in front of, and it depends on your circumstance, geographically, where you at, what is the competition like, things like that. But typically, if I were to just blanket statement this for all practices, a minimum of 500, but I would probably recommend you are in the $1,000 to $1,500 a month range for your budget. And that's just to get started. Once you start seeing those results, you can prove the ROI, then you can scale up from there, depending on if you need to or not. Some markets you're gonna capture most of the search volume with that budget, whereas others you're just going to be scratching the surface. So it really depends on a number of different factors, but that's a great starting place. And I also say with that, be okay, be comfortable risking that amount for 3 months. You should give yourself 90 days to see. 90 days with whether you're doing it yourself or with an agency like mine, for example. That's plenty of time for us to go in, put out some, use our experience, put out different keywords and ad copy and all that stuff, and get data back from Google, make changes, and start seeing some progress by then. You're going to see, oftentimes you're going to see lots of conversions from their phone calls, web forms submitted, things like that. So that's plenty. I think that's an adequate amount of time to do that. Um, but I think it's also important to remember, if you really want to get good at this, just say, I'm going to do this until it works. You know, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to keep trying and keep trying until it works. That's a very powerful word, until, that once you have that mindset, when I see people like that, they make it work, and then it ends up being such a long-term source of business for them that it's amazing. I mean, how much stress it removes off their shoulders because they've taken the time to invest in this process, this lead capture system essentially, and and it just provides that consistent, predictable source of new traffic and new patients for them. So that's a good recommendation to start. If you're wondering about budget, that's a great place to start. Minimum of 500 is what I typically say, but recommend in between the $1,000 $1,500 range, and then stay that for 3 months. You're going to see, if you're with someone who knows what they're doing, you're going to see some results, and you can judge it based on that, if that's worth it to you, if you want to continue to pursue that course or not. But typically give yourself 3 months. Okay. All right. So one of the things I want to talk about, I kind of wanted to use a case study to kind of frame this conversation. Have a client that I've been working with for not too long, since mid-December, probably we'll say January, just for for the sake of math. We've got January, February, March, April, and just into May right now. So for a little over 4 months. And when I received the account, she had been running, she'd been running Google Ads for two different times. One was with another agency. She ran for about a year and didn't see the greatest results. Saw some different phone calls here and there throughout that time, but not a huge surge when it came to new patients, right? To converting those people into new patients. And then she was with someone else that she had a connection to, who was, has quite a bit of experience. I mean, is not in the dental industry, but has a plethora of marketing experience, very in-depth background, but just still wasn't seeing quite the results that she was hoping for. She saw some results, but it just wasn't, she was investing $1,500 a month into her spend, and but just wasn't getting the return that she was hoping for. So I got involved, and I just said, hey, let's do a trial. Let me just tweak a few things. I can see some opportunities based on what she gave me access to the account, dove into it, looked at the analytics, and looked at the numbers based on the previous history. And I could see, this just was a different setup, and there's certainly more than one way to skin a cat. I mean, there's definitely more than one way to be successful with Google Ads. And so I'm usually not very judgmental when it comes to that. And I see someone else's approach. But in this case, I recognized right away that there were some opportunities that we weren't taking advantage of, specifically when it comes to broad keywords. There were, in this case, it's kind of the reverse, really, where they were following the recommendations that Google, the account, would automatically recommend. If you log into your account, oftentimes you see, hey, here's some recommendations. They'll email you. They'll, try and get you on the phone with one of their reps. They're relentless, and they get a lot of business that way. But the challenge, what I see with that oftentimes, is that they want you to start including more of these broad keywords so that you can increase the number of searches that you can show up on. And oftentimes, when you're using a broad keyword, you're going to show up on those searches and generate clicks for less. Like your cost per click goes way down because it's not as qualified of traffic. They're not, those keywords aren't as specific. So it's and that's part of the challenge. So is do you include these broad keywords so that you can increase your reach, show up on more searches, and do that for less money, as far as cost per click goes? Or do you try and focus more on qualified search terms? And my approach is always the latter, especially when we're dealing with budget. If we have unlimited budget, great, let's do, we can be very, very creative. We could be very, very generous with how we approach that. But when we're working with a budget, $1,500, $2,000, fairly limited budget, then I like to be very selective. I want to show up on the traffic that is the most qualified, right? I just want to use my money towards those people that are most likely to call my office. And you do that by selecting the right keywords, okay? And more often than not, we're going to avoid those broad keywords. Although, admittedly, Google has gotten much, much better at taking into account what the user has done in the past. So their search history, they might just say they have been searching for veneers, at some point, and then they just, instead of typing in, dental veneers near me or something, a more qualified search like that, they might just say veneers, and Google does take that into account and can show you those people. You could show up on that type of traffic, which would be technically qualified based on their search history. But the challenge is you don't always get that, right? I mean, you get, they may not have a search history of that. And so if you're showing up on these less qualified keywords, then you're not as likely to get the click. It could be someone's researching what is the cost of veneers, or why should I not get veneers? There's a lot of things that you could show up if you just typed in the word veneer or dental veneer, then you could show up on a whole host of searches that make no sense whatsoever for you to be paying for that click. Like, they're just not in the right mindset to be calling an office and scheduling an appointment. They're not there yet, And so that's one of the big things that we did with this particular account was focused on that more qualified traffic, was taking those keywords that are more contextual, is in the sense that, hey, this person is searching dental veneers near me, or dental veneers office, let's say Los Angeles, or whatever city you might be in, right? Plus the city. Just because that is much more qualified. That's someone who's looking for listings. They're looking for offices that they can pick up the phone and call, or they can go to their website, fill out a form, or get the information that they need right away, right? That is a much more qualified search than what is a dental veneer? That's a very, what we'd call top of funnel search. People are just barely starting they're in that awareness phase where they're starting to understand that they have a problem and starting to understand what the solutions might be, but they're not ready down to convert. They're not in the conversion stage, ready to pick up the phone, schedule an appointment, and pull out their credit card, right? So that's one thing that I see with a lot of accounts, is that they're using broad keywords. They're relying too much on broad keywords, especially based on their budget. And it can work really well in certain industries. Dental isn't really one of those that I've seen work very well. You can get, like I said, there are certain keywords that do perform fairly well, but you just got to be careful, because oftentimes those can also really eat away at your budget, because their interpretation of of that keyword and how and understanding which searches you show up on based on that keyword it can be very liberal. So you can spend the vast majority of your money on, or your budget on, those broad keywords. So you do have to be careful when you're using those. So that's a big thing that I would recommend. If you're just starting out, use phrase match, use exact match, and try and provide contextual keywords. So dental veneers near me, dental veneers plus your city, Salt Lake City, something like that. Those are good ones to start. And then as you monitor your search terms report, you can see and identify additional keywords that would make sense for you that you may not have thought of initially. So that's my biggest thing with broad keywords, is you just got to be careful. Next is and this is kind of speaking to the general strategy, is the quality of traffic. And I touched on this with broad keywords, but what type of traffic do you want to focus on? Okay. And, for those with a large budget, you could focus very much on, you could create a campaign that's solely focused on top of funnel traffic using those broad keywords. So you're showing up on those searches that are early in the customer journey, where people are just gathering information about dental veneers, for example, and maybe you're providing a resource for them. So you're saying, hey, download our list of frequently asked questions about dental veneers. Gives you everything you need to know to make the best decision possible, which mistakes to avoid, all these things, and that could be a good way to capture that traffic. They're not ready. They're certainly not ready. Most of them are not ready to pick up the phone and call, but some of them are going to be ready to download a resource like that. It's no risk. They don't have to feel pressured by anything, and you can capture their information and follow up with them on a back end. So nudge them along until they're ready to convert and to schedule an appointment for dental veneers. Okay, but that's, you can, but my point is, with quality of traffic, you're trying to give yourself the best chance of success, and that's focusing on the highest quality of traffic, unless you have a bigger budget and can focus on the top of funnel traffic, those broader keywords, but only do that strategically. So that if you have a way to capture that information via a resource or something like that, so that you can follow up with them afterwards. That would be my recommendation. But a lot of people just aren't taking the time to understand, is this traffic good or not? Is it qualified or not? More often we just kind of assume that that Google understands what we're trying to do, in getting patients, or getting phone calls or getting web forms submitted, that we just kind of plug it in and expect them to deliver those results. And while they are getting better at that, they're trying to make it easier for us. They're not there yet. It depends on how you set up the campaign. If you're just saying, I'm just going to maximize the amount of clicks I get, then that's exactly what they're going to do. It doesn't necessarily mean that those clicks are going to be qualified or that they're going to generate conversions. They're just going to try and max out your budget and get as many clicks for your budget as possible. So it can be real interesting inside Google Ads sometimes. So just focus again on the quality of traffic. And that typically comes from those qualified keywords, understanding what are people searching, what search terms are they using when they make a query on Google, and using that same verbiage, and then finding different, similar but different keywords like that, and then adding those to your list. So we talked about broad keywords, talked about quality of traffic, we talked about budget. And then one big one too is that I see is conversion tracking. A lot of people don't have this just because they don't understand how to set it up, or it's not set up properly. And so the phone call the calls from ads conversion is pretty straightforward to set up. So it's usually not too difficult to do that one. But when you're adding let's say if you have a form that you could fill out on your website to request an appointment, that is a little bit trickier. Oftentimes you do need the help of someone, your web developer or whoever is managing your Google Analytics account, for example. And so people don't have that conversion tracking set up, but that's the only way to tell, are these ads really truly working? You can go off gut feel. You could say, well, I did better this month than I did last month, but you don't really know for certain if it was because of your ads on Google, or was it because of it just happened to occur this time of year, where people had been thinking about it and they all just kind of came at once. So you want the data to inform your decisions, right? You want to be empirically based that way. So conversion tracking is a big thing, understanding and having the phone call conversion set up, having the web form submission set up, because then you can fully determine, is my investment really paying off? And what's also cool is that it allows you to expand that. If you wanted to scale that up and say, oh, well, this is what I'm seeing, this is what I'm getting consistently. Let's test this and add 50% more budget, or 25% more budget, or 100% more budget, and let's see if that scales. So you can find the point where you're still generating the most return for your spend, based on that. But you have to have the conversion tracking set up, right? And then you can adjust your campaign so that it's focused solely on conversion tracking. And you can technically, there are ways to set up a campaign that's focused on conversions, a maximize conversion campaign, but without having all the data set up. But it's, how are they supposed to know? I mean, it's you're not performing as well as you could in that instance. So conversion tracking is a big deal, as well as making sure that you have that set up, taking the time, or having someone just set it up for you if you want, just to make sure that it is set up correctly and it's firing correctly when someone, calls from an ad, or they call from, they call from a website. I mean, that could be something that you track organically as well. That's not necessarily tied to Google Ads, but you still want to see, are my local SEO efforts working, or my social media, is that working, and things like that. So having that in place is going to allow you to make more informed decisions and be better prepared to scale up if you so choose in the future. So that's what I got for you today, you guys. We talked about broad keywords. We talked about quality of traffic. We talked about budget. We talked about conversion tracking. And just to wrap up too, so this, going back to the story of my client that we've been working with for a few months, this past month in April, she set the record for the most new patients ever in that particular month. And so it's super exciting to be part of that and see a good chunk of those come from Google Ads and her campaign. And I just checked this morning. Let me go back over there. But just month to date, she's already ahead of schedule. She's looking to, and will actually beat this last month, if we continue on the way it is so far. So she's already generated a number of different conversions for this date, or month to date. So very, very exciting. So, but if you have any other questions too, if you have specific questions about Google Ads, send them to me. I'd love to hear about that. I'd like to compile some different questions and do more of these Q&A sessions, Q&A episodes based around a specific medium like Google Ads. So if you have questions about that, just hit me up. Let me know. Mark@markthackeray.com, or you can go to the podcast website, dentalmarketingsecretspodcast.com, and fill out the form there, dentalmarketingsecretspodcast.com. But until then, you guys, will talk to you next time. We've got a couple of fun episodes coming up, a couple of interviews. Until then, we'll have a great day. Talk to you soon.